use it as well. And they have different meanings actually. So just to clarify really quickly, when you're done doing a question, whether that's in drilling or a timed section or a timed test, blind review is reviewing questions that you got wrong before you look at the explanation or the correct answer. And that can be a little difficult in Daemon 1.0, if any of you are using the old Daemon. We're going to switch pretty soon, either this week or next week. But in 2.0, if you get a question wrong, as soon as you hit submit and go into review, and it doesn't matter whether you're doing drilling or time sections or time tests, it will go into a blind review state, which means you can't see what the correct answer is. You can't even see what answer you chose, and you have a chance to do that question again. And the idea is basically to force yourself in an untimed context to figure out what you messed up on your own. To the extent you can help yourself, that's the extent to which you're going to internalize what we're talking about, right? Granted, at some point you may need some help, and that's where you turn to the explanation. But you have a whole range of test takers. You have people who do practice problem after practice problem after practice problem without reviewing. And then you have other people who review, but it's almost like they're just going through the motions. So blind review is this like intermediate step to really force yourself to make a decision. What answer do you think is correct and why? Come up with your own reason and then compare that to the explanation as opposed to just passively watching the explanation. Cool.
Ben?
Yeah.
One quick question. You said you're switching to the new Daemon next week. So like are all my like old tests and old sections that I've done, are they going to transfer to the new Daemon? Because I've tried it and they didn't transfer. It was like something new.
Yeah. Did you actually try to import it, your data? Because there is an import link on the settings page. So if you click on your name and then click on import, we haven't really like publicized it yet because we're still working out some kinks, but it works for most people. Some people's data is a little older or corrupted or whatever. I know it sounds funny, but the Daemon has been around long enough that some of the data has changed. But in any case, yeah, give that a shot. See if that gets your stuff over. Okay.
Wait, is the import link on the 1.0 or 2.0?
It's on 2.0. So if you go to 2.0, click on your name. Yep. And then you'll see it at the bottom there. Yep. Okay, cool. I'm just going to jump in here and talk about logical reasoning for a half second. One thing that Nathan Fox, my partner in crime on the Thinking LSAT podcast, said like a week ago maybe or something. He sent out a newsletter that basically said basically logic games is a test of reading comprehension, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, that may sound funny at first, but the reality is that the entire test is just a test of reading comprehension, right? And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to do 6 logical reasoning questions. We're going to do 3 first that are kind of like warm-ups, and then we'll talk about them, and then we'll do 3 more, okay? But when you're reading these logical reasoning questions, if you're new and you may not have heard this, you absolutely need to read the passage first, not the question, because your number one goal is to read and comprehend what that passage is saying. Those passages fall into 2 categories. They're either arguments, in other words, they have evidence and a conclusion, or they are just a set of facts, okay? Now, if it's an argument, your next job is to figure out what's wrong with that argument. That's what you're essentially training to become, right? A lawyer. And as a lawyer, you have to hear arguments all the time, and you have to poke holes in them. You have to say, wait a sec, even if these facts are true, that does not necessarily lead to your conclusion because of X, Y, or Z, right? And so the best way to get good at logical reasoning and at the test is to read and understand what the argument is saying, and then try to figure out why the evidence that the author gave you is not enough or sufficient to prove the conclusion that that author drew. Okay. And people really struggle with that if they don't get their minds totally wrapped around the argument. So if for any reason you're being lazy and you're not plowing, you're plowing through the argument as opposed to really trying to understand it and really get what that person is trying to say, then you're going to struggle poking holes in it, right? So step one, read and understand. Step two, if it's an argument, figure out what's wrong with it. Sometimes it's valid, but that's really, really rare, okay? And then step three is to then take whatever you thought is wrong with it and then go and read the question and then read the answers. And after you read the question, you might need to make a short prediction about what you think the correct answer might be. Most questions lend themselves to a short prediction, some don't. And then you go into the answer choices and you eliminate the ones that are definitely wrong and whatever's left. That's hopefully you find the answer that you predicted. Okay, anyways, does anyone have any questions about that process? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and do these first three questions. Thank you, Ruth, for putting those in the chat. Just, yeah, give it your best shot. I'd much rather you get 2 of these right than rush through all 3 of them, but I'll give you about 6 to 8 minutes. If you finish them and you have the syllabus, you can go do more questions, but just focus on these 3 for now. I'm going to jump into the first one and talk to you, just walk you through how I would approach this question so you can see what it's like to read and understand the passage. Okay. Sorry if you had problems with 2.0, I did as well. I think everybody hitting those questions at the same time was too much for it, which is not good. We need to obviously figure out how to make that better. Okay. So test J, section 3, question 6. This is the first one. It says Yablonsky, I guess, who owns a car dealership, has donated cars to driver education programs at area schools for over 5 years. Okay. I don't know exactly what kind of cars, but this person is giving cars to the driver education program. I have no idea even what they're doing with those cars. Are they just letting people drive around in them, or are they like wrecking them for some reason? I don't know. It's interesting. I'm assuming they're just driving them around, but okay, this dealer, she found the statistics on car accidents to be disturbing, and she wanted to do something to encourage better driving in younger drivers. Okay, so she's motivated to help these people, and that's why she's giving her cars. Some members of the community have shown their support for this action by purchasing cars from Yablonsky's dealership. Okay, I don't see this as an argument. This is just a set of facts, right? So remember, when you're reading these passages, they're either going to be an argument or a set of facts. This one's just like 3 facts. In most cases, when they give you a set of facts, the question is just going to ask you, hey, given what we just told you, what must be true? And what I'm kind of gleaning from this is that in some cases, when you do something nice, maybe you donate, you do something nice for someone else, other people are going to do things nice for you, right? That's my takeaway from this. Question 6 says, which one of the following propositions is best illustrated by the passage? That is essentially asking what must be true. What is illustrated by the facts we just gave you? In other words, what has to be true? I mean, it's not that strongly worded. It's just saying which one is best illustrated, but it's easier just to think of this as which of these answers must be true. In questions that ask you what has to follow from the facts that we gave you, you have to make sure that the correct answer does not, I'm sorry, you have to make sure that the answer you choose does not do two things. It does not introduce new shit, okay? Because anything that's new, by definition, is not supported by what was already said, right? So it can't be new, and it can't be overly strong, right? It can't go beyond what was said. If I said that most of you like ice cream, I can't draw a conclusion from that that all of you like ice cream. That's too strong, even though it's on topic, right? All right, answer choice A. The only way to reduce traffic accidents. I'm not even going to keep reading. You don't need to keep reading, right? This answer choice is so strong. The only way to reduce traffic accidents, all we know is that this person is concerned about traffic accidents. She wants to help young drivers. She gave them some of her cars. Are there 101 other ways to reduce traffic accidents? Probably. So I'm going to say this is out without even finishing it. B, altruistic actions sometimes have positive consequences for those who perform them. Okay, the passage never talked about altruistic actions, but she donated cars to a driver education program. That seems altruistic. And it appears to have a positive outcome for her because now people are buying cars from her. So yeah, altruistic actions sometimes, notice how weak that is. That just means at least once, have positive consequences for those who perform them. That's got to be the answer. C, young drivers are the group most likely to benefit from driver education. We have no clue. They never talked about who other groups and how they would benefit from driver education. The key killer there is most likely, right? Most likely, I have no clue. D, it is usually in one's best interest to perform actions that benefit others. Was anyone tempted by this? Okay. It seems a little more on point, right? Anyone know one word here that, not that there's only one word that's a problem here, but one word that does raise a lot of problems? Okay.
If you're talking about C, then it's most.
Sorry, I'm on D now.
Usually.
Yeah, usually. So usually means most of the time. And all we have here is one example, right? I used two hands, but whatever. One example. So do I know that this is usually in people's best interest? For all I know, it rarely happens. It just so happened to happen for this person. So that's not good for this answer. It then goes on to say one's best interest. Do we have any clue what's in her best interest? I mean, it's likely that the fact that people are buying cars from her is a good thing and in her interest. But I don't know. That seems like a pretty big claim to make. Anyways, usually definitely kills it, and I wouldn't go any further than that. E, an action must have broad community support if it is to be successful. One, we don't know about broad community support, and this is way too strong. Like, there's no other way for something to be successful. If you're going to be successful, you have to have this support. What about things that are successful in my own life that only have to do with me? This passage doesn't talk about that, so it's out. The answer has to be B. Any questions on this one?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
So Ben, as far as I understand, we have to look pretty much the keywords for all of those questions and answers, such words as the only, sometimes, most likely, right? These words kind of like become milestones for the answers. Is that right or no?
Well, yes and no. I feel like I've made a mistake in some ways by emphasizing them. If you're not aware of these words, you're not going to do as well on the test. But the mistake that I feel like you're going down right now is you're like, oh, I only need to worry about these words. You need to worry about what these words mean in the context of the sentence as a whole. But they pop out at me as killing these answer choices because they were just way too strong. This answer does not have to be true. But if you go into this test and you start looking just for those words, you're also going to mess this up really badly. So first, I want to understand what that answer choice is saying. Now that I know what it's saying, by the way, these words are really not good. And here's why. So just make sure you're understanding the sentence first. Okay. Cool.
I have a quick question, Ben.
Yeah, go for it.
Going back to answer choice B, I chose answer choice D, and I do understand now why it's not correct. However, is there another way about going about answer B? Say if I didn't understand what altruistic meant?
Well, so there are words on the test that you don't necessarily have to know because they're just, you know, one-off words that are unique to that particular passage. Altruistic is not one of them. You just have to know that word. So when you know, if you, so what happens when you get a question wrong, right? You chose D here. You missed the correct answer, which is the altruistic mistake, but then you also chose D. And so one way to protect yourself against this problem is to recognize, oh, I see now usually means more than half. That would protect you from picking answer choice D. If push came to shove, you may come to a point where you're like, well, I know A is wrong, I know C is wrong, I know D is wrong, I know E is wrong. I don't understand what B is saying, but I know the others are wrong, so this has to be the answer.
Okay.
In this particular case, you also have to walk away with the knowledge of altruistic.
Yeah, I know now.
Okay, cool. Great. Let's go to the next one. So the next one is question 11, which is still just hanging there for me in Demon 2.0. That's really unfortunate, but all right. Test J, section 3, question 11. Feathers recently taken from seabirds stuffed and preserved in the 1880s have been found to contain only half as much mercury as feathers recently taken from living birds of the same species. Okay, first goal is to understand what they're saying. So basically we have stuffed birds from a long time ago and we have living birds, right? And they're saying that the mercury in the dead stuffed birds is lower. It's only half as much. Okay, I think I understand that. And I can almost anticipate where this test is going to go with this, right? It's going to be like, oh, therefore, there's more mercury today in the environment or something like that, right? This is just classic LSAT. But so before I even read on, I'm already like anticipating some sort of conclusion that the person is going to draw from this. And because I'm anticipating that bogus conclusion, I'm already poking holes in their potential argument. Like, if you're going to take mercury from a dead bird and then take mercury from a live bird, how do you not know that the dead bird's mercury has like, I doubt it evaporated, but somehow left the bird, right, over 100 years? I mean, it's been a really long time. So I'm already like hating this study because they're comparing two different things. Even if it was a dead bird now, it wouldn't have been around for very long. So I don't know, but it's a live bird, right? So anyways, we're comparing apples and oranges. The next sentence says, since mercury that accumulates in a seabird's feathers as the feathers grow is derived from fish eaten by the bird, these results indicate that mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. Okay, so this person did exactly what I kind of anticipated them to do. It's much more specific than I anticipated, right? They're specifically talking about mercury levels in saltwater fish. And that's because I guess the birds eat the fish. That just raises even more questions, right? Like, saltwater fish, like, were these birds back in the 1800s eating the same fish? I mean, I guess it's the same species. I don't know. It's a bad comparison, right? But anyways, the argument's not good because the conclusion is not proven. I'm not saying the conclusion is false. There's a big difference between saying the conclusion is false and saying it's not proven. I'm just saying that the conclusion has not been proven. As far as I know, it could still be true. It's just that the evidence provided is pretty damn weak, okay? Because it's got these holes in it. All right. The argument depends on assuming that. Well, that is a necessary assumption question. An assumption is just a piece of evidence that the author left out of his or her argument, and a necessary assumption is a piece of evidence that is absolutely essential. If the author were to disagree with it, the argument would crumble. Okay, so this is something that the author may not have thought of. They may not even be aware of it, but if you told it to them, they would have to agree with you if they wanted to stand behind their conclusion. Okay, yes, Anu, question.
Yes, Ben. Would you agree that there could be multiple necessary assumptions?
Absolutely.
Like multiple the author could agree with?
Yes, there are more, because the thing about an argument is unless the evidence is sufficient to prove the conclusion, there are holes, right? And there could be 10 holes, 20 holes. So there, and then even if you only have a handful of problems, there are still so many different ways to articulate a necessary assumption that, yeah, there's really just an infinite number. So actually, that's a good point. So when you're going through these answers, you're probably going to have a prediction in mind, right? But you have to be open to something else that you hadn't even thought of, but you read it and you're like, yeah, well, that's got to be true. If that's not true, this argument is going to die, right?
Thank
That
you.
doesn't, yeah, that doesn't mean that if the answer is true that the argument's now good to go. It just means that you absolutely need it. It's essential. Okay. My prediction here is that these birds are the same, right? That the way they interacted with their environment is the same, and Mercury hasn't like left the 1880 birds over time. That has to be assumed, because if it left over time, then, right, you can't really conclude that Mercury levels have risen. All right. A, the proportion of a seabird's diet consisting of fish was not as high on average in the 1880s as it is today. Okay, this answer seriously weakens the argument, right? If this is true, then that would explain why the 1880 birds or the dead birds didn't have as much mercury. So it really doesn't have to do with mercury levels rising in these saltwater fish. It really just has to do with the fact that the old birds didn't eat that much fish. So this is definitely something that the argument does not assume. The author does not have to agree with it, and in fact would likely disagree with it. Are you guys cool with that? So that's out. All right, B, the amount of mercury in a saltwater fish depends on the amount of pollution in the ocean habitat of the fish. Oh, okay. I think this answer would be tempting if you thought the conclusion of this argument was that mercury levels in the environment overall are higher now than they were 100 years ago, right? If you thought that was the conclusion, then you would probably need to make some sort of an assumption here that the amount of mercury in the saltwater fish is somehow related to the amount of pollution in the ocean generally, or the amount of mercury in the ocean generally. But this argument is just solely focused on the amount of mercury levels in the saltwater fish. So we don't need to make this assumption about the pollution generally, and it's out. All right, answer choice C, mercury derived from fish is essential for the normal growth of a seabird's feathers. Okay, we don't have to assume that mercury helped them grow. They could have grown for some other reason. So I hope that wasn't tempting. If it was, yell at me. D, the stuffed seabirds whose feathers were tested for mercury were not fully grown. Okay, I mean, that's interesting. That actually kind of what does that do? I don't know what that does, because we don't even know whether the feathers taken from the living birds were fully grown either. So it raises this possibility of something being different about the two birds, which is not good. But that's also could be true for the living birds. So I'm just gonna let this go, because I don't think it has to be assumed. If they were fully grown, that's great, because that could be true for the living birds as well. E, the process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. You have to assume that that process did not substantially decrease the mercury, because if it did substantially decrease the mercury, then of course that would explain why they have less mercury, and it might not have anything to do with the saltwater fish. So that is the answer. And we could make up our own answers. We could say, this is talking about the process used to preserve the birds, right? We could say something like this: the storage containers that the birds were left in did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. Or the tools that you have to use on dead birds but not live birds did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury. There's just like, we just keep going. All these things could not have decreased the amount of mercury. Otherwise, they would undermine the conclusion that the saltwater fish is the cause of the increase in mercury today, right? Okay. Anyways, any questions on that one?
Yeah. Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
So I came to C, and I took a few more seconds than I did with A and B, because I was thinking, is it possible? Well, I felt like they almost took not a random fact, but something that I didn't pay so close attention to. And then I went back just to look at the middle of the paragraph where it says, since mercury that accumulates in a seabird's feathers and then here's how I eliminated it: as the feathers grow,
Yeah,
is derived from fishing by the bird. So I eliminated it, ultimately saying it's possible that there's this correlation between the feathers growing and the mercury that accumulates in those feathers, but not necessarily mercury is an essential ingredient for feather growth.
Yeah, your reasoning is exactly right. And I think it actually just kind of reveals a need on your part to try to visualize a little bit more what you're reading as you're reading it. And I might not have done a good job of explaining what I was seeing in my head as I read that sentence, but if you visualize a little bit more, you probably would have kind of seen that. It's like, okay, as this bird is getting older, it's accumulating as they get older and as they eat fish, right? Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Did you have a question about that, or you just pointing at
I just
anything?
wanted to see if that was one way to eliminate it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the fundamental question we're asking ourselves is, does this have to be assumed? Does this have to be true? And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be true. We know that these things are happening together, but we don't know that they require each other, right, in any way, shape, or form. So,
right.
Cool.
It kind of reminded me just of thinking of the necessary assumption question also as almost the same as a must be true question, because we have
That's
to
exactly
find.
right. Yeah.
So because I was because I was almost thinking like, oh yeah, and it must be true. The question can ask, or the answer choice that is correct can be literally anything about what we are given in the paragraph, or like what must be true based on the paragraph, and even I don't know actually where I was.
I think just to keep it simple is
Yeah.
to think that you're by asking yourself what necessarily has to be assumed, you're essentially asking yourself what has to be true.
Right.
And so as you go through the answers, you just think, okay, if this conclusion is going to have any chance of surviving, which one of these answers has to be true. And E has to be true, because if that's not true, we have serious problems with the conclusion.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right.
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
don't mind. Can you look at this as also a strengthener by any chance when looking at these type of questions, or no?
Well, you can on some level, in the sense that the correct answer is going to help the argument, right? Like the fact that this process did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury helps us out here, right? But the thing about necessary assumption answers is that in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, they strengthen it so little that I'm not really sure what the value is in looking at it that way. In particular, when you consider that some answers actually strengthen the argument more, they're just not necessary.
Okay.
It's almost like it's almost like you have the wrong sort of test, even though it will strengthen. The real test is it necessary?
Gotcha.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yep. Caitlin.
So I have kind of like a more general question. So we kind of like went over the argument versus like set of facts, like kind of not setup, but like prompt kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the argument questions are a little bit easier for me because it's just like poking holes in the argument. So for whatever reason, like that works out easier in my head. So is there something specific like that we can look for the set of facts?
Well, there's not really any holes in the set of facts, right? It's more just like, here's some information, and you're like, okay, like you may disagree with it in real life, but you just have to accept it as true. So really what you're trying to do is then figure out what logically follows from that. And as you get better at determining what must be true given what was said, you're actually going to turn around and get better at recognizing the holes in arguments. So if you're good at recognizing the holes in arguments, you're probably just not thinking about these must be true questions correctly, because you're doing the same thing. You're just in a must be true question, you're saying, here's some facts, what has to follow from it. In an argument, you're saying the person gave you some facts, drew a conclusion, and you're saying, this doesn't follow, and here's why. You've essentially, that's the same skill, if that makes sense.
Okay, so like I guess in my head it's easier just to kind of like come up with predictions for the argument questions. So is it just like a practice thing instead of like having a trick for it? Okay.
Yeah, it's one, really making sure you understand each sentence, and then asking yourself how those sentences relate to each other. Because on some level they're related, right? It's not like they're telling you about cats and then astronauts and then cameras, and you're like, oh, cool. They're all somewhat related, and then you try to put them together to the extent you can, but you don't want to go too far, because those are the wrong answers. Those are the answers that jump, right? They put 2 and 2 together and they get 5, and you're like, oops, you went too far. But in the daemon, you can drill just those types. You can drill must be true and supported questions, which are essentially the same thing, and then get better at predicting what must be true, and then looking at the answers and seeing what answer is the one that they gave you. Okay, let's go to question 13. Let's see here. Test J, section 2, question 13. Standard aluminum soft drink cans do not vary in the amount of aluminum that they contain. Okay, so all standard aluminum soft drink cans have the same amount of aluminum, all of them? I guess that's what that's saying. 50% of the aluminum contained in a certain group, M, of standard aluminum soft drink cans was recycled from another group, L, of used standard aluminum soft drink cans. Okay, so you have a group of cans, M, and half, wait, was it half? 50%, so exactly half of the aluminum, I don't know how much of a can is aluminum, but 50% of the aluminum portion, right, came from another group, L. We're good? I just want to make sure I understand it perfectly, right? So in my head, I'm imagining a can is 90% aluminum, which means for group M, 45% of the can or 50% of that 90%. Are you guys with me? You're like, oh, math, we don't do math here. Yeah, you can do that. Half of 90 is 45. So 45% of that can is coming from group L. Since all the cans in L were recycled into cans in M, and since the amount of material other than aluminum in an aluminum can is negligible. Okay, whoa. So I was assuming that 10% of the can was something else, but it's basically all aluminum. So that means basically group M is 50% aluminum is from group L, right? And that's 50%. Okay. And all the cans in L were recycled into can M. Okay. It follows that M contains twice as many cans as L. That seems logical on the surface, right? But I don't know if this is obvious to you or not, but do we know that there's like a perfect process that you take L and you put it into M and you were able to get all of it into M, right? Like maybe you lose some when you melt it down and then reconstitute it. I have no idea, right? So it's certainly possible that M contains twice as many cans as L, but it's also possible that it's a little bit less, right? I just don't know how efficient the process is. Okay, the conclusion of the argument follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. This is a sufficient assumption question, which means unlike a necessary assumption question where we're asking, hey, what has to be true? We're asking instead, what if it were true, right? It says if which one of the following is assumed, would allow the conclusion to follow logically. Does anyone know what follows logically means?
The conclusion is proven.
The conclusion is proven. Yeah, must be true. So which answer is going to make the conclusion true? All right. So I want something that says all of L is going to go into M, right? There's no loss. You don't have any loss. A, the aluminum in the cans of M cannot be recycled further. Okay, that doesn't help me. I'm just trying to figure out that M is twice as much as L. If this is the end of the road for that aluminum, so what? B, recycled aluminum is of poorer quality. Recycled aluminum is of poorer quality than unrecycled aluminum. I don't care. I don't care. M sucks. So what? That doesn't tell me the quantity, right? Did we get twice as much M as we did, or yeah, twice as much M as we did L, right? Okay. C, all of the aluminum in the aluminum can is recovered when the can is recycled. Okay, this is actually what we were just talking about. Of course, it's much more wordy, but it's a saying that everything in L is getting all the way over to M. If that's true, and M is 50% L, then yeah, M is twice as many cans as L. So that's the answer. D, none of the soft drink cans in group L has been made from recycled aluminum. We don't care. We don't care about whether the aluminum there was recycled aluminum or just pure aluminum. I mean, all aluminum is essentially recycled. It came from somewhere else. E, aluminum soft drink cans are more easily recycled than our soft drink cans made from other materials. Well, that's really nice to know, but I still don't know whether 100% of it is able to transfer to the next group. Answer choice C says 100% can, so that's the answer. Questions?
Hi, Ben.
Hey.
Hey, I'm still having a hard time understanding the prompt. I'm getting lost at 50% of the aluminum contained in a certain group. I just don't understand from there to the end.
Oh, you're saying from the original passage, right?
Yeah.
So just in the interest of time, I'm really sorry. I'm going to ask you to check out the explanation, the written one. See if that makes sense. If that doesn't help, hit the ask button and just ask for clarification.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, cool. I'm happy to talk afterward too, if we still have time. All right. Let's go ahead and do the next three. I'll give you 6 minutes or so to do those, and then we will talk about them. Good luck. What'd you guys think, by the way? Medium, easy, hard?
This one was tough because I feel like there were so many possible answers.
Okay, let's dive in and see what we can figure out. Let's see, test J, section 3, question 17. When exercising the muscles in one's back, it is important in order to maintain a healthy back to exercise muscles on the opposite sides of the spine equally. Okay, it's important to not just do like a one arm pull down, right? And then you got to do both arms or something. A one arm pull up maybe. After all, okay, just so you know, it's not like critical, but if you don't know at this point, you might as well know from now on. After all introduces a premise. And what we just read did sound an awful lot like a conclusion, right? Hey, it's really important that you exercise both sides of your back or of the spine. Okay, if that's what you're concluding, what's your evidence? And here we go, we're getting it. After all, balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back. Okay, since the muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine. All right, so your muscles have to develop in a balanced way, right? Because they're both pulling on opposite sides of the spine and they have to pull equally in opposing directions. Okay, well, hold up. If the muscles have to pull equally, right? They have to pull in opposing directions equally. Does that mean that the muscles themselves have to be developed equally? Anyone? I mean, what if the amount of tension you have to apply on the spine is, I don't know, I don't even know what units of measurement you would use, but 10 units of strength. And what if one was 10 and the other was 15? Maybe they both exercise 15 or 10 units of strength and your back is healthy, right? So I'm not exactly sure why the muscles have to be equally strong to impose an equal pull on the spine, right? That's one problem. And even if that's true, yeah, I guess that's my big question is, do the muscles really have to be the same? Because this person is saying, oh, well, here's another thing. It says balanced muscle development is needed. And how are you going to get that? Well, according to the conclusion, you're going to get that by exercising the muscles equally. But could you exercise one a little bit more, just like 1% more, and it's not equal anymore? Is that a problem? I don't know. Anyways, this argument doesn't seem crazy, but it also doesn't seem airtight. Which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? That's again a necessary assumption question. So we have to ask ourselves what has to be true. So one thing I'm thinking right now is to maintain a healthy back, we have to exercise equally if we want to have equal muscles, and they've got all this stuff has got to be equal. A, muscles on opposite sides of the spine that are equally well developed will be enough to keep the back in proper alignment. Okay, this does not have to be assumed. This is actually like flipping the argument around and turning it into like what is sufficient to make your back healthy. The argument isn't what is sufficient or what is enough to make your back healthy. It's what's required. In order to maintain a healthy back, what do you have to do? You have to exercise equally. Does that mean that if you exercise equally, you'll have a healthy back? No, not necessarily. That's confusing sufficient for necessary. So this is not something that has to be assumed. B, exercising the muscles on opposite sides of the spine unequally tends to lead to unbalanced muscle development. Okay, this is one of the questions I kind of had was like, could I exercise unequally or could I have unequal, muscle development? and still be okay. This one is saying, no, you do have to exercise equally. Otherwise, you're going to have unbalanced muscle development. And then there's another assumption that if it's unbalanced, that will lead to a problem. But this person does seem to be assuming this. So I would keep this open. C, provided that one exercises the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally, one will have a generally healthy back. Answer choices A and C are making the same mistake. They're flipping this argument around and acting as if the author is asserting that exercising equally will make your back healthy. That's not what this person is saying. They aren't saying that if you exercise them equally, you're good to go. It's just saying if you want to have any chance of having a healthy back, you got to exercise equally. So A and C are wrong for the same reasons.
But it does say then in order to maintain a healthy back. Is that why I got confused with C? Because it say it is important in order to maintain a healthy back.
Yeah,
so you can generally have a healthy back, like.
Yeah, so you're making that mistake as you speak, because what you're thinking is, okay, in order to maintain a healthy back, this is what it's saying. You have to exercise opposite sides of the spine equally, right? You have to do that. So my question to you is, if you do that, are you going to have a healthy back?
I guess you would just be maintaining it.
Well, I mean, what if you exercise them equally, but then you eat nothing but top ramen?
Right, then you wouldn't.
Has anyone ever done that? Like, you go to college and you're like, wait, no one's cooking for me anymore. So now I'm going to eat solely top ramen. And then you begin to deteriorate, right? So what this really is saying is in order to maintain a healthy back, you have to exercise the muscles equally. And by the way, there might be a whole other bunch of stuff you got to do. Like you got to eat your veggies and all that stuff. So answer choice A and C, both of them are acting like, hey, as long as you do this one thing, you're good. And we don't know that. We have no clue. All right, D. If the muscles on opposite sides of the spine are exercised unequally, one's back will be irreparably damaged. Okay, that's just going way too far. I mean, that maybe helps the argument, that maybe strengthens the argument, but it's not something that needs to be assumed. All we know is that if you don't exercise equally, you won't have a healthy back. You won't be able to maintain a healthy back. Does that mean that it will be irreparably damaged? We have no idea. So this does not need to be true. It does not need to be assumed. E, one should exercise daily to ensure. I already hate it. Daily? Well, we never talked about the frequency. So do we need to make this assumption? I'm not even going to keep reading. I mean, if you guys found it tempting, I'm happy to unpack it. But okay, sorry. I see a comment here. So wait, are A and C making a sufficient assumption instead of a necessary assumption? No, it's not that they're making a sufficient assumption. It's not that they are a sufficient assumption. So we have sufficient assumptions and necessary assumptions. And then we have claims about what is sufficient and claims about what is necessary. And all I'm talking about is the original conclusion in the argument says something about what is necessary to maintain a healthy back, not about what is sufficient to guarantee that you'll have a healthy back. I'm sorry for the confusion, but they're like two different things. In this question, we are looking for a necessary assumption, but the argument itself or the conclusion itself is making a claim about what is necessary to maintain a healthy back. That's all. And answer choices A and C act as if it's making a claim about what is sufficient to maintain a healthy back. I know those words are probably not natural, but hopefully using them more and more will make them more natural.
Ben, by any chance, can you unpack E? I chose that answer and I'm kind of confused on why it's not the actual correct answer besides the one should part. But I was connecting like proper alignment from.
So what you got to keep in mind is you're asking yourself, does this absolutely have to be true? So if there's any element of that answer that does not have to be true, the answer falls apart. So E, One should exercise daily to ensure that the muscles on opposite sides of the spine keep the back in proper alignment. Do we have to assume that this exercising process has to take place daily?
No.
I mean, what if you found out that someone worked out every other day? As far as we know, that could work. I mean, maybe it doesn't, but we don't have any reason to believe from the argument that you need to do this daily or that you should do this daily.
So when I am looking at like wrong questions to like, or wrong answer choices to pretty much get out, should I be looking at like, for instance, the frequency, like how it uses the word daily as well as strong language to go ahead and remove those answers, or?
So that itself is not inherently wrong. It's just that this argument was never about frequency. So when you're asking yourself, does this answer choice have to be true? You have to have some reason for why it has to be true. And I don't have any reason to believe that this should take place on a daily basis. All the person is asserting is that if you're going to work out your back, you got to work them out equally. Whether you do that once a week, once a month, once a day, I don't know. If you're going to work them out, you got to work them out equally. That's all this is about. So could this be true? Yes. Could it help? Yes. Does it have to be true? As far as I know, no. So then that's enough to get rid of it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. May.
So in C, the word generally is kind of throwing me because it sort of seems like it would tie the argument together, because it's not maybe saying, of course you have to do that, but just in general, it'll help your back be balanced. Is that the type of word that we should just completely be avoiding and always be skeptical about?
No, again, that's kind of taking it too far. You always have to look at these words in context. They could be wonderful in other contexts. And in fact, the reason the answer is correct. But I would just step back. Don't worry about the word generally. We can talk about it. We will talk about it in just a second. Provided that one exercises the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally, one will have a generally healthy back. So maybe one way to think about this, actually, let's talk about the word generally. I think if this answer choice had been rewritten, at least one person will have a healthy back. That, I don't even know if that has to be true, but I'm thinking that it might, in the sense that if you're gonna, well, no, not necessarily. You could have something that's necessary, but no one ever actually accomplishes it. This argument is just saying that if you want to have a healthy back, you have to exercise equally, but it may be the case that you do this and in general, your back still remains unhealthy because you're persistently doing backflips and landing on your back on concrete, right? Like it doesn't have to be true. And the word generally actually does make it harder, because that means most of the time, right? And we're like, no, it could be that it's just something that you need if you want to succeed, but it doesn't mean you'll ever succeed. It's kind of like the LSAT. In order to go to a good law school, you have to take the LSAT, but you couldn't say, hey, as long as you take the LSAT, in general, you'll go to a good law school, right? Like it may never happen. Not to end this class on a sad note.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, no, the last part, right? The last part is what's helpful. Just remembering that. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, good. Okay, let's go to the next one. Sorry, we're going over a little bit. Sociologist. This is question J324. Sociologist. Romantics. I'm not even sure who romantics are. These are people who are like obsessed or interested in love or something. Romantics who claim that people are not born evil, but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions they form, cannot be right. Okay, that is screaming conclusion, right? It's like, hey, these people have made a claim and I'm saying they can't be right. Okay, so this is almost certainly the conclusion. And I see that the next word is for. Do you guys remember the last word I just told you about that introduces premises? What was it? After all, thanks, Victoria. This one is 4. 4 also introduces premises. So it felt like a conclusion, and I now know it's a conclusion because they're continuing on by saying 4, which is just because, right? They're like, okay, now I'm going to tell you why. And notice the next sentence after that says after all. So basically what we have here is conclusion, premise, premise. But don't worry about that. What's more important is the claims that these romantics are making. They're saying that people aren't born evil. You guys were all born innocent and good, but you may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form. Okay, so you're good, and then, or at least not evil, and then you make a company or something like that, and that company makes you evil. Got it? And this person, though, is saying they can't be right. In other words, either people aren't born good, they're born evil, or institutions don't make them evil. Sound good? Something's wrong there. They're saying that's wrong. Okay, why? Okay, because the romantics misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. Okay, please explain. After all, institutions are merely collections of people. All right, in other words, maybe it's not the institution causing the person to become evil. Maybe it's the person causing the institution to be evil. In other words, people really are born evil, and then maybe they make the institution evil, right? They misunderstand the causal relationship. Are we cool with this? Okay. Is that a good argument? Well, the fact that institutions are merely collections of people, does that tell you which way the causal relationship goes? No, all it says is that you have an institution, a company, it's made up by people, but who causes what? Does the institution make the person bad, or does the bad person make the institution bad? Or what's most likely the case? It's both ways, right? Some of you are thinking about a bad company you were at and how it made you a worse person. I don't know. I have no idea. Okay. Anyways, which of the following principles, if valid, would most help to justify the sociologist argument? Oh, okay. This argument sucks because it doesn't really tell me anything about the causal relationship. I need something that says, hey, the people are making the institution bad. A, people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than people acting individually. This just talks about what people can do individually versus together. It doesn't talk about who causes what. So I would say this is not helpful. B, institutions formed by people are inevitably imperfect. Okay, the institution's not perfect, but is it good or evil, and what caused what? So B doesn't help me answer those questions, and it's out. C, people should not be overly optimistic in their view of individual human beings. Okay, you shouldn't think people are good. Maybe, or at least you shouldn't be overly optimistic. You could still be optimistic. So I really don't know what's going on here. C or D, a society's institutions are the surest gauge of that society's values. Great, I can figure out what their values are by looking at their institutions, but who caused what? E, the whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. This is a classic LSAT answer because it's wordy, it's abstract, and they hope you just cross it out because you're like, WTF, right? Like, what was that? But if the whole, in other words, the institution, does not determine the properties of the things that compose it, the people, then that means it's not the institution making the people bad, it's the people that are bad and making the institution bad, right? That's the answer. Questions? Okay.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question about E. I interpreted it as the opposite of what you just said. and maybe that I just misread it because it's kind of like convoluted, but I thought that E was saying that the corporation like being evil doesn't mean that the people that made it are evil.
That's oh no, it's just saying that the corporation being evil does not cause, right? It does not determine the property of the people that composed it.
Yeah, wait. Now I'm really confused.
Okay.
Okay, I might need to just like think about this.
Yeah. So
offline.
bottom line, the way I read E is that the company is not making the people evil. Therefore, it must be the people who were evil originally. And that goes
Okay.
against the romantics claim.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem.
I have a question, Ben.
Yeah, go for it.
Every time I deal with these types of questions, my brain just really can't process it and understand what's going on. I find myself reading it like 3 or 4 times. Is there like a way besides like identifying the conclusion and the premises about like going about the answer choices with these and trying to like just pinpoint something?
Yeah, well, first, when you said you read it 3 or 4 times, it almost feels to me like you're reading the whole thing and then reading
Yeah.
it again. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, because I feel like I'll read it the first time, I'll identify the premise and conclusion, but then I just don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, so don't worry. For starters, don't worry about identifying the premise and conclusion. I'm telling you what these things are just because I think that they're a layer of understanding that we should all get to. But first and foremost, just focus on understanding what the person is saying. And you need to do that by not reading the whole thing. So you read, in this case, there's only 2 sentences, right? But what you would want to do is you would want to read romantics who claim that people are not born evil. And if you feel like the passage is getting away from you, you need to stop right there and you need to just digest that piece.
Okay.
And the way I would digest that piece is I would say, okay, apparently there are people called romantics. I have no idea. I mean, if there are some literary folks here, they probably know what group this is. I don't know. But there are some people who are called romantics, and they apparently are claiming that people aren't born evil. Stop. That's enough. I just need to understand that. And then once I understand that there are these people who think that we are not born evil, we are born good, or at least not evil. What else do they claim? They claim that these babies, essentially, who become people, may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form. Okay, so I got to stop there and I got to like decode that, right? And figure out what is happening. Oh, okay, there's babies, they become adults and they make companies or something, or government institutions. And apparently those institutions make them evil. Oh, okay, got it. Now I understand what the romantics are saying. Then the sentence continues. They cannot be right. Okay, now I know that everything I just figured out is at least wrong according to this person. And so I hope that.
No, that definitely did. Just breaking it down that way and reading it that way, it did help bring a lot more clarity, because I would just read it and I'm just like, oh my goodness. And I find myself starting over and then I'm like trying to pause. And then I'll just try to get rid of some answer choices. And I'm like, oh, this is just too much at this point.
Yeah. So the brilliant thing about this strategy is that as you do it, your ability to read and process information will slowly expand. Okay. So that means some of us might read this entire first sentence and not need to stop. But as soon as you feel the sentence getting away from you, that's where you stop and you say, okay, hold up. What do we got? We got romantics. They have a belief. What's their belief? And you just lay those out in, those real, it's like second grade level sentences. And I'm not saying that to be insulting. That's how I communicate with myself, right? I don't unpack this and keep it in my head in this like very high level language. I'm just like, okay, there's these folks and they think this and they think that, and that's it. And it's like, then it really sinks in.
No, yes, I agree. I do have another question. It's when I went to help, it says this is a strengthened question. Is this not a justify the conclusion question?
It says most help to justify. So you're looking for the answer that's going to do it more than the other 4, which is a strengthened question as opposed to a sufficient assumption question.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Cool. I think let's go on, I guess. The next one is, let's see, here we go. Okay. Oh, this is also 24. Test J, section 2, question 24. Car companies solicit consumer information on such human factors as whether a seat is comfortable or whether a set of controls is easy to use. Okay, again, that's kind of wordy, but I get what they're saying. They basically send out surveys, right? They solicit customer or consumer information. They basically ask people, hey, is the seat comfortable? Do the set of controls, are they easy to use? Do they work? However, designer interaction with consumers is superior to survey data. All right, so car companies are asking people what they think of these things, but this person, it sounds like, is asserting that it's better for the designer to actually go and talk to the consumer. I'm seeing some guy sitting in the passenger seat being like, what do you think of that? What do you think of this? And apparently that's superior. The data may tell the designer why a feature on last year's model was given a low rating, but data will not explain how that feature needs to be changed in order to receive a higher rating. Okay, in other words, when someone tells you that the seat is uncomfortable, you may not know why or how you're going to fix it to make it comfortable, right? You just know it sucks. I could see that. I feel like that's what this is saying. And if you're sitting there with the consumer, you can ask them, like, what the heck do you mean by that? Well, how do we solve this? I mean, I could see problems in this argument. Maybe designer interaction is impractical because you can only talk to a few people, and you may talk to a few people that have a very uncommon experience with your device, right? It's so uncommon that the advice that they give you and you implement ends up actually hurting more people than helping. Anyway, the reasoning above conforms most closely to which one of the following propositions? Okay, this is interesting. This was an argument. The middle part was the conclusion, saying that designer interaction is superior. But instead of asking us to strengthen the argument or to weaken the argument or to identify a flaw, instead it's just saying, hey, which of the following essentially must be true? It says closely conforms. When a question asks you what closely conforms to something else, it's essentially asking you which answer choice mirrors the passage as closely as possible, right? So if you just ask yourself which of these answers has to be true given what was said, that's going to get you in the right mindset. Sound good? Okay. So A, does it have to be true that getting consumer input for design modifications can contribute to successful product design? Well, first of all, it's a pretty weak claim, which actually makes it easy to agree with, right? Getting consumer input for design modifications, in other words, sitting next to them and asking them what we should do, how we should modify the design, can contribute to successful product design. Yes, that's why this form of interaction is superior. So I would keep this open because this seems like something that must be true. B, car companies traditionally conduct extensive post-market surveys. I don't know that they're extensive. I don't know that this has been happening traditionally for like a long time. Do we know it's post-market? Yeah, it seemed to kind of allude to that by saying last year's model. But I just don't know if it's extensive or traditional, so I'm going to say it's out. C, designers aim to create features that will appeal to specific market niches. They could, but I have no idea because they never talked about that. D, a car will have unappealing features if consumers are not consulted during its design stage. Now, well, was anyone tempted by this? Okay, some of us not. I think this is just too strong, right? It said that designer interaction is superior. In other words, it's better, right? You're going to get better outcomes. But this is like a car will have unappealing features if consumers are not consulted during its design stage. I don't know that they're going to be unappealing. They're just not going to be as good as they could have been. They could still be appealing. Anyways, E, consumer input affects external rather than internal design components of a car. We never really compared internal versus external, so that's just not something that has to be true. New information. I'm going to go with A. Questions?
Hello, Ben. I have a quick question about this one. So I know that in the daemon it says the question type is supported. I was wondering, because you describe a lot about like top down or bottom up or something, like how you would categorize this, and if I guess the question stem is just kind of hard for me to differentiate it from different types of question stems that are similar to it.
Sure, totally. This question stem is one in which I would say it took me the longest as an LSAT teacher to categorize, because you have ones that involve arguments, you have ones that involve just a set of facts. But I think the long and short of all of that is that if it says closely conforms, it's asking you for not what must be true, it's merely just asking you for which one is most supported. So that's why it's technically a supported question. But if you think of supported questions as must be true questions, you're not going to be in any trouble. If anything, you might eliminate all 5 because you're too strict, and then you have to go back and ask yourself, okay, well, there wasn't any one that had to be true, but is there one that is more true than any of the others? And that would get you the correct answer in a supported question. But supported questions and must be true questions are essentially the same. So bottom line, if you remember that closely conforms means supported, and you remember that supported means must be true, you can just say, hey, this is a top-down must be true question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ben, quick question. Is it okay that this question was saying, it didn't really say that designer interaction is superior? It was just kind of saying that consumer input for design can contribute to a successful product. Like it didn't say one was better than the other, like the argument was kind of saying.
Oh, well, I actually took the getting consumer input for design modification as a reference to designer interaction, because later in the argument, it said, the data may tell the designer why a feature got a low rating, but the data will not explain how that feature needs to be changed. So it's the designer interaction that gives you the information about how to change the feature, which is what I think answer choice A is referring to when it says design modifications.
Okay, yeah, I kind of read it as in like one was better than the other, and that's what I was looking for in the answers, but.
Well, so yes, one is better, it's superior, right? But it must be true. We could say more, I guess. The correct answer could have said more, but answer choice A does still have to be true. We have to assume that this designer interaction, which is about how to modify the design, is going to contribute, at least on some level, to successful product design. Because if it didn't do that at all, then there's no way that it could even be superior.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's almost like you were like narrowing the correct answer too much. You're like, oh, I need an answer that says it's better. No, you just need an answer that must be true. And this is one that says it's got to help somewhat. And yeah, it does have to help. Otherwise, it wouldn't be better. Okay. James?
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, Jillian, we'll get you next.
Thanks, Ben. So I was deciding between A and C, and obviously C, and I ended up choosing A, but my question on C, which was I think what kind of tempted me a little bit, was its reference to like market niches. Like, because the way I understood it was like if the interaction with the designer, the customer feedback is the market niche. Like they're telling you specifically some information that they want, which could be kind of niche. Or
sure.
Does that make sense?
James, that could be true. The question is, do we know that the designers are aiming to create features that will appeal to those two specific market niches, or are they talking to that person and just trying to figure out from that one individual what is true about the market in general?
So you would say more so like the problem is with the word aim, because we don't know the intentions of the designers themselves. We just know.
Well, I would say it's problematic with the word niches as well. I'm not saying that it can't be true. I'm just saying that we don't know. I mean, it's a combination of both, right? We don't know why they're talking to these individuals. Are they talking to these individuals because they want to figure out what niche this individual is in and then tailor to that person? Or are they talking to this individual because they just want to figure out what's wrong with the product for most people generally, but as a matter of experience, you can only talk to a few people.
Okay, that makes sense. So we just can't know their intentions, basically. Like the information they gave us doesn't give us enough to tell us anything there.
No, I mean, we can deduce some things, right? We can figure out that they must be trying to make things better. Well, I guess we don't know for sure, but most likely, right? Like that's why they're asking these people. But specifically, this idea that they're going after a particular market niche goes too far because they didn't tell us what they're then doing these designs for. They're like, oh, we're going to do it for everyone just like you. No, maybe they're just assuming that you're like everyone else.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Julian.
Hi. Yeah.
Julian,
Can you
sorry.
hear me?
Yeah.
No, it's cool.
Yeah.
So like this is more of a comment than a question, but I think like, so it says proposition. So it's like, that's what made the answer so obvious to me. It says the reasoning above conforms most closely to which of the following propositions. So someone is proposing something. So what would you be proposing? Like the only thing, I mean, I know there's many ways to answer this, but the only thing that one would be proposing would be A, getting consumer input for design modifications. That's all I was going to say. I was just wondering when you see that like word proposition, does that put it into a certain category?
Yeah, I'm confused. Are you saying that people cannot propose B, C, D, and E?
No, they can. I just don't think that they would be. The most likely thing that someone would be proposing would be A.
Given what was said.
Yeah. So most likely. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're asking.
I just wonder if the word proposition, if that like does that put it into like a certain category, you know?
I don't see that. To me, any answer choice is a proposition on some level.
I got you. It's just the way I saw it. Got you.
Yeah. But if what it's really getting you to see is something that someone would say in response to these claims, which claim is the easiest claim to make or proposition, then you're essentially asking yourself what has to follow, what must be true, what is most supported by this evidence, which is all different variants of the same question.
Got you. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any last questions?
I have a question. Oh.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sarah.
Unless her name. Okay, I'm Sarah. I was wondering, this kind of befuddles me. Reading comprehension of the three, according to the statistics on LSAT Demon, it's by far the highest. But then my logical reasoning is very low, like really, really low. And in my brain, it doesn't make sense because isn't like reading comprehension LR on crack? So I'm confused on how there's such a disconnect.
Yeah. So one, they are testing, the test itself in its entirety is testing fundamentally one core skill, which is, can you read and understand what you're reading? And then can you deduce logical things from that, right? Like people, they don't understand what they're reading. Even when they do understand what they're reading, they jump to conclusions that don't necessarily logically follow from the information that they read. So there's a whole bunch of places where you can go wrong. That said, reading comp, logical reasoning, and games are all testing that skill in a different way. So for example, reading comprehension is testing your ability to understand, to comprehend primarily, because what they're doing is they're giving you lots of sentences. So you have to understand lots of them, and you have to understand them on a detailed level, and you have to understand them on like a big picture level, like, oh, what's the main point of all of these claims together? That's not really tested in logical reasoning. And so that makes reading comp harder. And this is what you were talking about. You're like, hey, isn't LR or isn't reading comp just LR on steroids or something like that? I can't remember what you said, but yes, in that sense, when logical reasoning asks you what the main point is, it's a lot easier to figure that out because you have a lot less to deal with, right? Whereas in reading comp, it's a lot harder. But the thing about reading comp, the trade-off is that they rarely test you on logical fallacies. They just say, hey, here's a bunch of information. Tell me what must be true. And in fact, most questions in reading comp are either asking you about the structure, what's the main point or what's the primary purpose, or what must be true, which are essentially top-down questions. So if you look at reading comp questions, I would say 90% of them are essentially what must be true. In other words, given what was said in the passage, find an answer that basically restates the passage. Logical reasoning, on the other hand, is requiring you to analyze why the conclusion doesn't follow. So it sounds like that's what you're struggling with. If you're doing
it is. I guess I just need to, obviously I need to drill more. Even hearing all of you guys, when you guys use all these very specific terms for things, I don't know. I'm not following. I've only been studying for 4 weeks, but still, I'm still not quite, even when you say top down, I've like literally Googled it and I've read it and then I think I get it. I don't know. It's a brand new world for me. So I think I just need to remember that. But comprehending is easy if I have a lot of text to try to understand. It's like identifying categories, I guess, and what they're really asking me.
Yeah. So one thing is there's a lot to talk about, and I'm sorry to kind of throw some jargon at you. That's not the goal. But one thing about learning the LSAT, thankfully, is that it's very, very repetitive. So when you drill a question in logical reasoning, which is your weaker point, right? If you drill that question, you try to understand it as best as you can. You try to understand any of the jargon we unfortunately bring up, hopefully minimal, but bring up in the explanation. If there is something you don't understand, hit the ask button so we can clarify. And then go on to the next one. And it won't be long before you realize you're like, wait a sec, there's actually not that many things that we're throwing at you. It may seem like that right now, but it's just so repetitive. So you just need to see it in different contexts.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, Ben, can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah, go for it.
Ben, I'm 10 points shy of my goal, and logic games are getting the best of me. I'm taking the exam in June. I was wondering what would be the best strategy in scoring those 10 points or scoring higher. How would you approach the situation?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, logic games is a good place to pick up points.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about points, I'm assuming you're talking about LSAT points, right? You're not talking about raw
Exactly.
score points.
Just 10 points. That's all I am. 10 points shy of what I want.
LSAT points.
LSAT points.
Yeah, okay. Because raw points, well, I don't know how many that is raw with the new flex scoring, but yeah, I mean, I guess, are you drilling at least one game a day?
More. I'm talking about hours, like about, I'll say about 10. No, I'm lying. About roughly 5 to 10.
Okay, it's very possible that you're actually doing too much of the wrong work. So what I would suggest is that when you do a game and you start watching first of all, you do the game, right? You're using 2.0 or 1.0?
I do 1.0 usually.
Okay. I mean, try out 2.0, because when you do the game, right, if you get any wrong, you're going to be thrown into blind review immediately. So you have the chance to figure out the ones you got wrong before anyone tells you what the correct answer is.
Okay.
So that's one thing you could start doing.
Right.
The second thing is when you start watching the video explanation, don't watch the whole thing. Just start it. As soon as you get an idea, you're like, whoa, I didn't think about doing that. Stop the video and then try to do the game again with that new insight. In other words, we want to help you, but as little as possible. Because, in other words, if I carry you across the finish line, then you haven't really gotten any stronger, right? It's just like I need to push you a little bit in the right direction. And then to the extent you can run the rest of the way, the stronger you're going to get for the next event.
Right.
Now, once you start watching it and you're like, oh, you have an epiphany, you try to do the game on your own, then maybe you go watch it and you're like, okay, did I execute that all the way as well as I could have, right?
Mhm.
And if you didn't, then you figure out where you didn't, and you do the next game. So that may mean that you can only do 3 games a day, right? Because you're spending a little bit more time like trying to do the work on your own. But
Right.
I think that will translate to a higher score faster.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ben,
Yes.
I have a question based on games also. Like today I was doing test 79, and it was a struggle, especially with the last game, the famous computer virus game. How
Yeah.
often do these come on the LSAT? Because I figured it out somewhat at the end after doing it repetitively, but it's still, it's the type of game that makes you want to bang your head on the wall,
Yes. So these games are challenges. They're also opportunities because they are what keep other people from scoring as high as you will eventually score, right? I wouldn't stress about them too much. I'd just keep drilling. They don't appear that often, those particular one-off games. I mean, they're kind of random by definition, right? They're just not that common. But I think it's good that you kept trying to do it until you could figure it out. At the same time, just go back to drilling, because the better you get at the easier games, the more time you'll have at the end to grapple with that harder game. And sometimes that's the difference. Someone who has 10 minutes to grapple with it can figure it out somewhat, whereas someone who only has 5 minutes, it's just not enough and you just give up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Sometimes, I'll have like 10 minutes left to do the last one, and then I somewhat figure out how to get like 3 out of 6, So that's somewhat satisfying.
Keep hacking at it. Yep. Yep. You're pushing past anyone else who gave up.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a question for you, Ben.
Yes.
My first question is the last logical reasoning that we just did, question 24 on test J. What would you consider that? Would you consider like easy, medium, hard, or?
Actually, let's just take a look. It has a difficulty of 3. So that's.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, I just seen that.
Oh, no worries. Are you using 1 or 2?
I'm actually new to this, so I plan on registering. I just started the free trial, so I plan on registering tonight.
So you should see like 3 dots near the
Mhm.
title. That's the difficulty level. So
Okay,
3 out of
perfect.
5 is like the hardest. Yeah. So this is kind of in the middle.
Okay. My second question is I just learned about LSAT Demon. It was referred to me by a friend who used it on her previous exams. I'm registered to take the June test, and my test scores for the LSAT have been pretty poor in the past. My main difficulty is reading comprehension. Do you have any things I should really focus on? Should I be focusing more on drilling and time when it comes to the exams, or should I, or when I'm doing reading comprehension, should I be focusing on something entirely different?
No. Yeah, drilling, going back, the vast majority of people for the whole entire time that they're studying should be alternating between drilling and individual time sections. Full tests are great. You should do them maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. But your best use of time is drilling and time sections because you get the immediate feedback.
Okay.
In other words, I need you to get questions wrong and then metaphorically get slapped in the face as you try to figure it out, right? That's how you learn the fastest. Like, oh shoot. But then you're also like moving the ball forward as effectively as possible. With a full length test, you're doing that whole test, and then you're reviewing some of the ones you got wrong and then getting a little tired and probably moving on to something else. So you're not really getting any feedback on the work you're doing. I mean, you're getting some, but you're not, it's a very high level feedback, right? We want the more specific, the more detailed, the more precise that feedback is, the more helpful it's going to be to you and learning.
Okay, so when I'm maneuvering LSAT Demon and things like that, should I be doing when I am in one study session, I should be focusing on drilling, then right after focusing on the other portion? Or is that something I should read alternating day, every other day, or what would you suggest?
I would, a lot of people, they'll drill one day and then do a time section the next day. And even though you're struggling more in reading comp, I would expose yourself to all 3 sections every 2 days at least. So you don't, some people are like, oh, I'm just going to do reading comp and I'm just going to figure that out. But there's only so much you can gain from that. And then now you're not really picking the low hanging fruit you could from logical reasoning and games.
Okay. And just one more question. With people who do have poor test scores and then taking this course as well, do you notice an immediate, do they like, from like the feedback you have received, do you like, does LSAT Demon like, that's what I'm looking for, receive or like are informed about like the major jump with that student? Like, is that common for someone to score like in the one, like the low one, like the high 130s, 140s, but then can increase to 150s?
Yeah, so we hear all the time from people who go up a lot initially and even finally, right? But we also hear from people in which they've been with the demon for a while and it took them longer to make that progress. Some of it's a function of how much you're studying, how much you're studying difficult things, right? Like you can have people kind of just go through the motions and they're not going to make as much progress as quickly. It varies quite a lot. But I would say that I do feel like it could be what is it, confirmation bias, right? The people who are succeeding are the ones who are actually reaching out to us. But there are enough people who reach out to us who are like, hey, I was in the mid 140s and bam, within 4 weeks, I was in the mid 150s. And it's like, okay, you still have a lot of work to do because I don't want you applying to law school in the mid 150s. I want you to get up into the 160s at least. But that's great, and that's a lot of progress in 4 weeks. I would expect, 2 months, 3 months, 10 to 15 points is probably average. It's a little hard to figure out exactly, but I think that's a reasonable number. You're planning to apply this fall? Yeah, sorry, I know that's.
So originally I did apply for the fall, but then after taking my February LSAT, I wasn't too satisfied with my score. I didn't get it really an increase. It kind of stayed the same after the June LSAT I took overseas. So now I'm in the process of trying to take the June, then possibly if schools don't accept this June test score, then I would reapply for fall 2022.
Yeah, I would don't apply this year. Just withdraw your applications. You're going to get so much better offers if you can take the test in June and August, get the best possible score you can get, and then apply early. Because you're even applying in February is like super late. So
yeah,
you just need a better score and you need to be early in the application cycle. Like you have everything going against you if you try to apply this cycle.
Okay.
Sorry if that changes your life by a year, but
it does a little bit, but I think it'll be better in the long run.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool.
Ben,
questions, yeah.
One final question. I'm sorry, I asked you a lot of questions, but what do you think about diversity statements and how much do they help in applications?
Well, if you have something to say, then they can be very helpful. Again, it's going to depend a lot on what you say and how you say it, but sometimes people are like, well, should I write a diversity statement? And if you don't have a diverse background to talk about, then you shouldn't. But if there's anything you can talk about that would show how you might contribute to the class because of your past experiences being somewhat unique, at least compared to the general population.
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, I do. I mean, I come from Haiti, poor country, grew up there, survived an earthquake. But it's like I wrote some of that in my personal statement already, overcoming these obstacles. So how do I remove some of it from my personal statement and focus on that particular topic in my diversity statement?
You got to be careful because it sounds like your personal statement is talking about something that took place a while ago. Like, overcoming challenges that you had to encounter as a child or even as a high schooler or even as a young college student are most likely too long ago to pack the punch that you want them to have, especially if you're in high school or younger. Because if you're in high school or younger and you overcome a challenge, that's awesome. But in most cases, it was due to the support that you had from your family or friends or the circumstances that, you're not. So anyways, just be careful about that. Make sure you're writing about something that took place in the last 2 years, and it doesn't have to be a challenge overcome. It could just be, look, this is what I did at work. And then in your diversity statement, that's where you don't necessarily need to talk about challenges. You just talk about, hey, this is where I lived. This is what it was like. And that alone is enough. It's like, okay, most people in your class are not going to have that experience of growing up in a poor country where the infrastructure is not as stable as it is here, right? They don't get it. They're like, what? You didn't have electricity all the time? Well, I don't, what's that? That's new. So that alone is enough. You don't need to like oversell it, right?
Perfect. That's perfect for me. Like that's actually a story of my life. Like 2 hours of electricity every 2 days, you know. That's not usual for kids here, you know. So
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben.
Yep. Okay. Tanya.
Hi, I just have a question about whether or not I should bring up that I'm in a paralegal program that I'll be graduating from next year. I graduated from my undergrad in '96. I have a master's I got in '98. I stayed home with kids after I was done teaching for 10 years.
Okay.
So that's where I am now. So I want to shift towards law. My kids are teenagers. I'd like to hold off on law school until they're just a little older. So I thought maybe paralegal would help me get to know law and get to know professors who might write me a recommendation. So I guess when I write my intention, my personal statement, is it a good idea to be using why I'm doing a paralegal program? Is it a good idea to get references from these professors? Because my college professors won't remember me, and I don't think my grad school professors will either.
Yeah. So absolutely get letters of rec from the people, your professors in this program or your teachers in this program. I don't know that you need to explain why you're doing it. It's kind of self-evident, right? Like if you're doing that and then you're applying to law school, it's like, okay, you clearly have an interest in the law, and now you're taking that further, or you're taking it the next step. And so you're probably wasting space on something that doesn't need a lot of explanation. And it's going to be on your resume, right? So you can add it. They can see that you have it, and they can see your grades from it and everything. But I would probably, talk about something else.
I mean, nobody wants to hear about staying home with kids for 10 years. So I think that, I started my own business while I was at home with the kids. So I could talk about that, and I could talk about the teaching for 10 years.
Well, how long ago did you end that business?
I actually still have this business now while I'm taking the paralegal classes.
Perfect. Talk about that. Talk about something, as a business owner, right? There are a lot of problems that you encounter, and then you got to solve them. And you talk about one or two of those problems that you encountered and what you did to solve it. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to be oversold. Oh my God, there was a series. No, we were moving forward, and I had to get this paperwork, or I had to do this. And this is what I did to get that done and get that approved, or to secure that client, or to solve this client's problem. And then they're like, oh, okay, we can see that you encounter problems and that you solve them. And heck, I mean, a lot of small business stuff ties directly into the law. I'm not saying that you need to tie it in, but if that led to your interest in law, you could have a sentence about that too, right? Now I want to do this more, but in a legal context.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Next question.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
Can for my personal statement, does he have to be a professor, or can my boss write it for me? She's an attorney, but I work with her.
Your personal statement? Your personal statement, you have to write.
No, not my personal statement. I apologize. My letter of recommendations. I apologize.
Yeah, I can. Well, so some schools require 2 academic letters, but they'll waive that if you've been out of school for a while. So if you don't have academic letters, then get them from your boss. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Violetta?
Hi, Ben.
Hey.
I don't know if you could hear me. Sorry. First off, nice meeting you. And first time here, I appreciate the breakdown of the answers and everybody's question in regards to why they chose their particular answers. But So I was listening to Nathan on Thursday, and my biggest issue thus far has been my reading comprehension. And someone came on Thursday and they pretty much share the same issue I'm having is whenever the paragraph doesn't seem like interest to me, like personally, I go into like, what am I gonna have for dinner? What's the weather like tomorrow? Just like off the wall. And Nathan was pretty much like, too bad, so sad. Like you're gonna become a lawyer and you're gonna be reading crap that you don't care about, but guess what? You have to care about it because it's gonna be your job. So with all that being said, is there anything you can, I guess, like any advice that you can tell me how to get my mind to coming into that paragraph or whatever that I'm reading and actually find some sort of interest? So when I'm reading the, to focus. So when I'm reading the questions, I'm not thinking, oh, that's the time that I was thinking about the weather instead of,
Well,
it's awful. Like it's really awful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing is, and this is just a struggle that everyone has. It's just on a continuum. So some people are at a different place with this, and that is your ability to focus on what you're doing. So I would suggest taking up meditation, because meditation is the practice of focusing on certain things. So you become more aware of where your thoughts are going, where they came from, and how to take control of them when they lead you astray, right? Like meditation is this constant practice of like, focus on your breath. And you're like focusing on breath. And like 2 seconds later, the person's like, hey, are you focusing on your breath anymore? You're like, no, I'm actually thinking about the jerk who cut me off in the, whatever. And then they're like, okay, pay attention to the breath again. And so then you start to become aware of how your mind just wanders all the time, right? And you become better and better at focusing. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but I would suggest doing that just for anyone. It's just a general healthy practice to gain control of the uncontrolled mind. The second thing I would do is when you're doing reading comp passages, I would keep in mind that they're only 15 sentences. You don't have that. This is a 4-minute exercise, right? You only have to focus for that long. It's not like, I think if we feel like the task is bigger than it actually is, it's easier to wander because there's this like barrier to like, oh, I'm gonna have to get through this. Well, actually, it's not that long. It's gonna be over pretty soon. You can do it. You can focus for that long. And then also pretend to be interested. So I heard one psychologist describe our mind as many sub-personalities. And I think it's a good analogy because you can actually kind of deceive different parts of your brain, it seems, right? So if you read a passage and it starts to talk about 18th century literature, right? You might be like, I don't care about that stuff. Just start pretending to be interested. Be like, wow, well, I wonder what 18th century literature was like, right? And then there's like another part of your brain that is kind of, oblivious to deception. It's just like, oh, that part of the brain is interested in this. Maybe this is something I should be interested in. And it seems to allow people to engage more. Fake it till you make it. It actually works on some level. It's kind of like smiling and then you actually start to feel happier, right? Like you're tricking some other part of your brain. You're like, oh, well, we must be happy. We're smiling right now. And I'm using we because there's, several of us inside. Some of you are like, wait, what? Are you crazy? No, come on. You all have to admit there's more than one voice in your head. If you haven't figured that out yet, then you've never faced a challenging decision, right? You're like, should I pick up that $20 off the side of the street there and give it back, or should I keep it, right? These are multiple voices telling us what to do. Anyways, regardless of the insanity or sanity of our heads, you just want to fake it. Pretend to be interested, and then it'll start to become more interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, Victoria.
Yes, thank you. So I'm registered for the June LSAT, and the last day to push it back without penalty is Saturday, May 29th, and that's kind of coming up, but I am not sure how to gauge whether I'm prepared or not, and I definitely want to push back. If I am pushing back, I want to push back like with no fee. So leading up to that date, should I take a couple of practice tests? Like, how do I gauge kind of whether I'm ready for the June LSAT or not?
Well, if you're taking the June LSAT, you should probably be at a point in your studying where you're taking or able to take one test a week. So you could just keep taking one test a week until then, and then you'll have a pretty good sample of kind of what your score range is and whether that's good enough to take the test. Would you be happy with a score in that range? If not, don't take it.
Got it. So one test a week then leading up to that date.
Yeah, and if that's a struggle, like if you take a test and you really have a struggle reviewing all of it because your scores are low enough that you're getting enough wrong that you have to like spend a lot of time reviewing it, that itself might be a sign that you just need more time.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right, guys, that's 9 o'clock. I know that's double the time that we had scheduled for this. Ruth, Sophie, thank you if you're still here. Ruth, I see you here.
Yeah, I think Sophie had to head out, but I'm here.
Yeah, anyways, thank you. Sorry, that was super long. I guess I'll have to reconsider the length of this class. But thank you, everyone. Have a good night. And
thank you, guys. I appreciate you, Ben. I appreciate your advice.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
All right, Ben.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Ben.